Well, thanks everybody for being here today. I'm Sam Harrington. I am the Director of Audience Experience at Yale Climate Connections. I'm going to go over a couple of things quick, and then I will turn it over to our moderator, Yale Climate Connections book editor, Michael Svoboda. We had over 380 people sign up for our virtual book club this summer, where we read Not Too Late, which Thelma co-edited and Nikayla contributed an essay to. If you're one of those people, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We really enjoyed learning from you all and how you were sort of being inspired by and growing with these essays and interviews as you read them. We've got a really exciting conversation in store tonight. If you have questions for Thelma or Nikayla, or just generally throughout the call, feel free to put them in the Q&A. I'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll answer some of those questions at the very end of this hour that we have together. As I mentioned, the webinar is being recorded, and I will send out a link probably towards the end of this week to everybody who registered, so you can rewatch it, share it with friends, share it with classes. And I think that's all from me. So with that, I'll let Michael introduce himself.
Okay. I'm Michael Svoboda. As Sam said, I am the book editor and a regular contributor for Yale Climate Connections. I've been working with Yale Climate Connections for, I think, about 10 years now. And it's a pleasure to be here for this discussion of Not Too Late, Changing the Climate Story from Despair to Possibility. So thank you, Sam, for setting this up. And thank you for Nikayla and Thelma for agreeing to help us out with this. So I see my job is just setting up some background and context before we get to the questions from the readers. And so, Thelma, you were one of the editors of this volume. Can you tell us how it came together?
Yeah, Rebecca Solnit and I connected during the pandemic through some random ways, as life often throws at you. And over lots of different conversations, we realized that we both were really dedicated to the practice of hope. And we wanted to continually fly the banner of hope. And we saw that there was a much needed space in the climate movement around an honest conversation about hope, and then also what we can do with it. And so we had a bunch of different ideas. We wanted to do a podcast. We wanted to do just a website and social media. We're like, how can we do this? Because Rebecca wanted to take a break from writing books. And then she was having dinner with some friends one night, explained our idea, and they said, Rebecca, that needs to be a book. So we decided to do a book. But our goal with it is to create something that is a toolkit, something that you can just keep in your backpack and pull out and read a chapter whenever your soul needs it. Something that people can really take with them and kind of have as like a balm whenever the necessity arises.
That's B-A-L-M,
Mm-hmm.
not B-O-N-B.
Yeah, B-A-L-M, yeah.
Okay. Nikayla, you're one of the contributors. How did you come to join the project?
Well, I formerly was an organizer with the Sunrise Movement. And part of my unofficial job, I would say, was to be the writer and the, one of the keepers of hope for the movement. So, yeah, so I feel like it just kind of came together that way, in the sense that my friend Eric is friends with Rebecca, and Rebecca was looking for a younger writer, Thelma too, obviously. Yeah, we got connected that way. And I believe the three of us went for a walk in Golden Gate Park, right? And we talked about hope and activism and organizing in the future and like what the movement needs. And yeah, I think after that, they asked me to write the piece. And yeah, so that's how it came to be.
Okay. It's an unusual mix of contributors. It's about 4-to-1 women to men. That's close to what we see in college courses devoted to sustainability, environmental studies. What's the how would you explain the ratio you wound up with?
Well, the way we put the book together, Rebecca and I just were together for a weekend in San Francisco, and we mapped out the outline of the book, the general flow of the conversations that we wanted to make sure were covered. And then we just thought up our dream team. We looked at the different topics, thought about who do we know, who do we really respect, who do we want to be a part of that. And so we just kind of mapped out who would be a great voice for different sections. And then we reached out to everyone, and pretty much everyone said yes. So the book is really, again, like a dream team of just some of our favorite speakers, writers, thinkers on climate issues. Something we were thinking about as we put together the list of is the male-female ratio. We definitely wanted to have a balance, but we were thinking a lot about the global to US perspective as well, because we're both American. Do we make it like a global book, or do we make it an American book with a global lean? And that was something that we ended up more thinking about, is like, we can do this book from our perspectives. It is definitely edited from our, our lenses. So it's an American book, but it has voices, especially from Asia and the Pacific, particularly because that's where we have some of our strongest other communities and relationships. So it's definitely a book that we hope people around the world read. And we also recognize that it's not a completely global book. But we are super grateful for everyone who's contributed. And it just kind of happens that it's a lot of women. And but we were so grateful that everyone said yes and joined in.
Are there more women's voices on hope in the context of climate change than men? Is that fair to say?
I haven't done a study on it, but I would say that there is a strong connection between toxic masculinity and despair. And again, something like bringing forth Rebecca into this conversation, something she talks about is like wearing a black leather jacket makes you look cool, in the same lens that having despair and being angsty kind of lends you that cloak of rebel without a cause coolness. So I think you do see a lot of men hold on to this angst, this despair, because it's kind of that rebel, I'm just too smart. It's that black leather jacket feeling. Whereas if you're wearing a pink frilly frou-frou dress, it's hard to sometimes look super cool in that. And sometimes that's what hope is. It isn't always the coolest look to be hopeful and positive. Society has that toxic masculinity that likes to knock you down if you are too positive. And so I think there definitely is a gendered aspect to it. And I think especially for women, and this is from my voice as a mother, like there is no choice but to be hopeful, because we're thinking about the next generation and those who are coming ahead of us. So it's like hope is a mighty weapon that we have to hold on to.
Okay. Nikayla, are you seeing some of these gender factors in your experience with Sunrise?
Yes, from the youth organizing perspective, women or femme identifying people definitely were the majority in the room. Most of the time it's kind of like a joke that if you're a woman and you're straight, it's very hard to find love in the climate movement. Because there's not a whole lot of straight cis men. And then I will also say that I think the division of emotional labor definitely burdens women much more than men. So I think when it comes to a thing like climate hope, I think it's something that just by societal construction tends to fall on our shoulders.
Okay. I just find the issue fascinating because we see that in our courses all the time. Do you embrace it? Do you go with it? Do you try to balance it? I don't know, but it was interesting to see it show up in the book. Thelma, you mentioned that you and Rebecca mapped the whole thing out. Does that mean you knew that the rough divisions that you wanted to have, solutions, frameworks, the future, and you asked people to contribute to those sections? Or did you look for contributions and then sort what you had into baskets based on the similarities of the themes you found?
No, we started off with our outline. So what is the flow that we wanted to do? And we were really particular. We decided we wanted to start with the solutions. So many climate books start with the problem, which is fine. It's good to educate people on the dynamics of climate. We figured if people are reading this book, they probably already knew something about climate change. And so we didn't want to lean into the problem too much. The problem is mentioned in most essays as well. So we really wanted to start off with that clarity of that we have the solutions and they exist. And then the other elements around imagination and forward thinking, and then also some of the other like social, emotional guides aspect that you find later in the book. That's how we really thought we're very intentional about how we wanted to take people on this journey. We really saw it as them walking through a portal, you know, and having these guides, these signposts. So we mapped it out, and then we thought about contributors who would be a great person for each section. So for example, we knew we wanted a section on imagination and the liberatory power of imagination. So the person we thought of were like, of course, Adrienne Maree Brown. That's who we would love to have and be a part of this. And so we would just reach out to those folks, and they could either contribute an existing piece, write something new, or we could do an interview with them. And yeah, it was a really beautiful process, and I'm so grateful for everyone who contributed.
Mm-hmm. You've already mentioned that it was important to get a global perspective, not just the United States. And within that quest, there was a definite effort to include the voices of Indigenous people and people of color. Could you talk about the contributions you sought and the kinds of perspectives you sought from Indigenous people around the world?
Yeah, so we have the solutions section. There's a contribution from Jade Begay, who's an incredible Native American activist, writer, thinker, filmmaker, storyteller. She's amazing. And it was really important in that solution section to not just, talk about technology and policy, but grounding in the fact that human beings know how to exist in harmony with nature. Human beings know how to already build regenerative systems. Indigenous communities have had that knowledge. And that's like a key piece that's missing from so many capitalist conversations on climate. So Jade really talked about that, how Indigenous people are bringing forth their wisdom and also creating solutions from that lens. And so that's so important. We also have some really great Indigenous writers from across the Pacific. I'm based in Fiji for a lot of the year. A lot of my network is Pacific Islanders. And so having voices from Guam, from Marshall Islands, from Fiji, from Tonga, who can again speak to a lot of also like frontline wisdom of how do you cope with the fact that your islands are going underwater, and what do you do about that? What is the wisdom that you can tap into? What does the resilience actually look like? And so having a lot of Pacific Islander voices was also really important, because we didn't want to dismiss despair. With hope, we honor people's grief, we honor people's despair. We don't want to dance around it. But then the question is, what do you do? How do you not stop at despair? What do you move beyond? So, having someone like Kathy General Kitchener in the book, she's a poet from the Marshall Islands. The Marshall Islands is one of the islands most at risk from going completely under from sea level rise. Someone who thinks about that loss, all the time. Having her perspectives on despair and hope, we thought was a really important way to get complex truths in the book.
Mhm. I'm not sure I'm remembering who said this, but maybe it was Rebecca, that it's okay to experience despair as emotion, but it's not an analysis.
Yeah, that's Rebecca for sure.
Okay, okay. Nikayla, are you seeing a greater presence of people of color in the environmental movement as you experience it? Is that especially true in Sunrise?
Well, I left my Sunrise staff job about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
So I can't really speak to Sunrise at present. But yeah, the racial makeup of the climate movement definitely leans white. And it is a deep concern of mine. Because it's like, we know the facts. We know which populations are most affected by the impacts of the climate crisis, and that's, people of color. And if people of color are not in the movement, if they're not, speaking from their perspective, advocating for solutions that will benefit them, then it's kind of hard to see how the future will be better than the past. So yeah, it's a concern of mine, and I think it's a part of a project I'm trying to work on right now, in how to create the organizational conditions that are more inviting and inclusive to especially young, but people of color. That's the only way we're going to win, if we have a multiracial, cross-class, very diverse movement that is organized with people from every corner of our society.
Mm-hmm. And many of the essays in Not Too Late speak to that. Several also talk about the legacies of colonialism. Was that part of the original map, Thelma?
Oh yeah, completely. You can't talk about the climate crisis without talking about colonialism and the history that racism, that inequality, that injustice has led to where we are now. So Farhana Sultana wrote a brilliant piece, really bringing this truth forward, and so we need people to understand that climate change is about more than just CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions and bringing those numbers down. It's about unwinding so many systems of oppression that have been building for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so there is that deep connection. And like Nikayla said, if we want to actually create solutions, we have to think about this from an intersectional lens. If we don't, we're just doomed to keep on making mistakes again and again, and not developing the solutions that are really needed to bring change on a substantial level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nikayla, why don't we tackle your contribution to the book? I found it a rather harrowing story, and your role in it was seemed difficult to navigate. Could you tell us about From Hunger Strike with Love or To Love?
Oh, sure. Yes. When I wrote that piece, I had just quit my Sunrise job. This was spring 2022. And a big reason why I quit was I was feeling extremely burned out, like torched from the inside out. And I had lots of feelings arising inside of me that demanded a lot of time and energy and space to be felt and processed and healed. So for that reason, it was hard for a while to find a hopeful story to tell. Yeah, hope is obviously the theme of the book, but honestly, I was feeling mostly anguish and sorrow and despair. because the climate bill we were trying to pass, the climate bill related to, that was the theme of the hunger strike, the demand of the hunger strike, didn't pass. At that moment in our history, it was kind of off the table. So the future looked very dark. So instead of trying to write something that honestly maybe would have been kind of like bullshit, I was like, I just want to go where it hurts and I want to feel it, and all of its grief and fear and anger and confusion. And for me, that really was the hunger strike. So I took it as a challenge, to write about one of the most like painful moments for me in the climate movement. And yeah, as a challenge, as a practice, like find the hope for me in it. So I sat with it for many months. It was hard and painful. I had a lot of feelings of guilt and shame and failure arising for me as I was writing that piece. But I dug through it until I came to the other side. And it was like a dance of avoidance and grief with this essay. It's very raw if you read it. Or like a diary entry, I would say, for that snapshot moment in my life. But now it's frozen in time and published forever.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, like digging through the feelings of grief and fear and confusion and anger is like how I continually arrive at a place of being very hopeful.
I mean, you had to guide 3 people who were, by their choice, for this purpose, putting their lives in danger. And you had to manage the way they engage the world. I mean, it sounds like an extraordinarily difficult emotional place to stay in for that length of time.
Yeah, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But we came out of it, and we're all still friends. Still very glad that we did it. And yeah, it's kind of like now with the people that were a part of this action, like I feel like it's like a bond for life. And some of the projects I'm beginning to work on now are like with those people, because we went through this hard thing and we came out of it together, stronger, more bonded, and with a lot of trust. And being in the movement and like doing actions, like you're going to go through really painful things, but seeing those moments like not as, if you can get through those moments and not break up in it, it's like you come out as a stronger team. And it's like those kinds of teams that are going to carry the movement forward.
I feel like you are serving as both co-editor, and in that capacity, you're interviewing some people, also making their own contributions. And over this time period, you are also having a child. And you talk about that in your final contribution to the book. How did the 2 experiences mesh for you, the climate, or what was it like to experience the climate crisis with hope, with a child?
Yeah. When Rebecca and I met and mapped out the book, I was about 4 months pregnant. And so the pregnancy lasted through the whole process of putting this book together. Literally like 2 days before I went into labor, we were putting the final touches on the manuscript and sending and getting it to our publisher. So my pregnancy was a key part of this whole book process. Being pregnant while writing a book on hope is really, it forced me to look hope directly in the face. And similar to what Nikayla says, it forced me to get raw. It forced me to be honest about how horrifying the climate crisis is and what the future looks like, and be brutally honest about what it takes to get us where we need to be. To say it's not too late is not an act of whimsy. It is a rallying cry of truth that I hold to, for not just me, but for my son and his future. And so it forced me to be very, very honest about where we're at and what we needed to be in order to create a livable future. Rebecca has taught me so much about hope over the years, and I don't think I understood the practice again. Like, the hope is a practice. It's something you have to work on. It's not something that you just do one day and then you have to work on it every day. And I don't think I really knew that until I had a miscarriage. And I talk about this in my final essay. Is I remember during my miscarriage, this quote that Rebecca told me where she said, you don't plant a seed unless you hope it'll grow. I'm thinking about that and how I planted the seed and it didn't grow. And the act of having to take the grief of my miscarriage and keep on going, keep on moving with my life, keep on deciding to keep on working on having another child after that loss, that practice of hope taught me so much, and I've applied it to my climate activism as well. My husband is also a climate activist. He's part of the Pacific Climate Warriors, and their rallying cry is "We're not drowning, we're fighting." And that also became a rallying cry for us, and like the creation of our family is like, we're not drowning in sorrow, we're fighting, we keep on moving. And so that aspect of having to move my body forward and keep on going, even despite loss, taught me so much. And then with the pregnancy too, having to be really honest about the world that we're going to build and the world that we have to build, because there's no choice but to. Hope is a radical act. It's a radical practice. And it was really, really important. And I'm so glad that my husband and my son have been able to be a part of the process.
I think we've addressed the broader context. Before we go to some of the questions we've received from readers ahead of tonight's webinar, I did want to ask you to deliver the takeaway that you would like listeners and readers to draw from the book. It's there in the title, it's repeated over and over again, and maybe it should be said in a couple of different ways many times during our conversation, but why is it not too late? Or why is it important to know and act on the conviction that it's not too late? Thelma, I want to start with you.
It's not too late from a bunch of different lenses. The head of the IPCC, so the collection of the world's climate scientists, in their latest report, he blatantly said, in his own words, it's not too late. The science is clear that we actually have time if we act now. And so with climate, I think sometimes people think it's like we're going to fall off a cliff. You know, if we hit 1.5 or 2 Cs, then it's done for, all is lost. But every degree, every 10th of a degree matters. And so even though things are terrible right now, and it's honestly going to get worse, the main takeaway that we want to get people to have from this book is that they have power, and that you have power to create change. And the future is not written. Too often people act like we know what the future is going to look like. It's going to be a massive dystopia. There's nothing that we can do. When that's false. The future isn't written. And in that uncertainty is actually spaciousness for us to create the future. And so we want people to remember that they have power. They have power, especially when they act together in community, and they have power when they act together in love. And so that's really what we want people to take away from this book, that they, you know, whether it's day by day, week by week, hour by hour, we want people to keep on moving, keep on going, because every action matters right now.
I don't think there's any other book on climate change out there in which the word love appears as many times as it does in Not Too Late. That was very striking. Nikayla, what would you add, or how would you
Oh, I think Thelma did a wonderful job of delivering the one-liners about not too late. I guess the only thing I'll add is yeah, I was reading the Hamburg Climate Impacts Report that was released earlier this spring. And the key takeaways from this report are, again, that it's not too late. And also like what will determine our climate future right now isn't like a tipping point or anything like that. Like it's human agency, it's collective action. And yeah, right now it's like all of the power to determine our future is just literally in our hands. And it's the choices we make now and in the years to come that will determine the life we'll have in, 50, 100 years. And it's just recognizing your own power and believing in your own imagination. So it's the only thing I'd add.
I think I remember one contribution, and I've read this in other places. There will never be a moment when it does not make sense to do something about climate change. There's no point of no return. It can always, every degree makes things, every 10th of a degree makes things worse. So there is never a point at which it does not make sense to act. So let's turn to some of the questions that some of the people who joined the book club have posed. One is, how can we encourage retirees to take action on climate in their communities, especially those who are living in senior living and retirement communities?
There's a great new organization called Third Act, which is actually all about organizing retirees. People with time on their hands, people in the older years of their lives. Bill McKibben started it. Jane Fonda's been a part of it. Rebecca's a part of it. So check that out. Third Act. They're amazing. They're doing great actions. That's what I would channel people into. It's an amazing organization that's really bringing a lot of the older community into the fight. So they're awesome.
Nikayla, you said your relationship with Sunrise ended, but are you still working with any youth groups that try to recruit seniors to help with that work, or vice versa?
No, since I left Sunrise, I've been finishing a master's degree. So no, I haven't done any of that work. But I think the only thing I'll add to Thelma's answer, Third Act, yeah, great organization. But then also, I mean, I think what older people can provide younger people in this time is support in the form of emotional, spiritual, physical, financial, especially for this work. Yeah, and really being open to a dialogue and hard conversations about these topics. I talk about it with my grandma a lot. She just turned 80, actually. And we've come very far over these past few years in the way we talk to each other about climate change. So yeah, I would just encourage conversation and support, as well as joining an organization, because that's maybe.
No, it was a helpful addition. Thank you. Next question. How do I promote climate optimism, resilience with my students when I, as a geologist, don't really have it myself? Your thoughts on that? Nikayla.
Yeah. Oh. Go first, Nikayla. You can
go first. I got to think about this one.
Something that's really game-changing is once you start looking for stories of solutions. So my day job, I love my job. I work for an organization called the Solutions Project. We support frontline grassroots-led organizations who are working on climate justice issues. Once you start looking for wins or solutions or, powerful things that are happening, once you have an eye for it, you start seeing it everywhere. And I know there's a term for this and my mind is blanking. Somebody help me here. But that I encourage you to start looking for solutions. Go through your news, go through your Twitter, your social media, look for positive climate stories, not just the disasters. And you're going to see them. Once you start looking, you're going to see them. You're going to see communities who are taking action, who are building microgrids. You're going to see communities who are working together with unions to create good jobs. You're going to see communities who are coming together to create healthy, powerful food systems. The solutions are out there. And so sometimes you just have to open your eyes and look for it. Once you start looking for it, you're going to see it. And that is something that helps build optimism. So I think something you could ask your students is find 3 powerful stories of climate solutions in a week and have them search for those stories on the internet. If you want to see any, go to the Solutions Project social media. We have a bunch on there. But have them actively search other solutions, because if you just talk about the problem, you're just going to bury yourself deeper, when again this book points out we have the solutions. So search for them. That's a simple task that you can have people do.
Okay. Nikayla?
Yeah, completely agree. Really inviting different perspective, more optimistic, hopeful perspective into your life. You know, maybe if doom scrolling is really like getting you down, follow some more hopeful accounts. Just change the content that you're interacting with. And I think what I like to do when I'm feeling like despair or depression in, you know, all areas of life, just like asking myself, like, why do I feel this way? And write it all out. And then what can I do to like challenge these feelings, these beliefs? And that kind of gives me like a roadmap of where to go and how to change my emotional state.
The book also has a chapter and an extremely incomplete list of climate victories, which was heartening. And I think our questioner could consult that as one way forward. There were also contributions that stress the importance of continuing to experience pleasure and joy at being in the world. Want to pick up on any of those, Thelma?
Yeah, one of my favorite lines in the book is when we interviewed Adrienne Lee Brown and we asked her, like, how do you maintain hope? And she said, you have to microdose pleasure to maintain hope. Which is something that just like always stuck with me. And which is something I've had incorporated into my practice. Before I ever did climate work, I was a human rights activist, living on the edge of a conflict zone where things are really difficult. And so taking time to watch a sunset, you know, sing a song, like listen to poetry, take time for beauty and joy and laughter, because this is the world that we want to build. We want to build a world where we survive and thrive, where beauty and joy make sense. So if you're feeling despair, tap into pleasure, do something that is beautiful, go into nature, connect with people. It's okay. You don't have to be sad and like angry all the time. Show the world that we can create, and that world is one that's joyous and beautiful.
Mm-hmm. This would be related. How do you help other people hold and act on hope? Can you share your hope? Is hope contagious?
How to help other people hold on to hope? I would say, you know, speaking only from my perspective, but I don't think anyone can give anyone else hope. And if you do get that feeling from someone, I think it's fleeting. But I think the hope that you find yourself is the hope that endures. So, I mean, like I said when writing this essay, what was important to me was feeling in the whole spectrum of feeling, you know, the pain, the grief, the fear, the anger, confusion, but then the joy and the beauty as well. So I think it's like really looking and accepting at this colossal unending mess that we're in, like just looking at it and just fully accepting it and like seeing the world as it is. Because then, you know, seeing the world as it is and going through the emotions that come with that seeing, you come to the other side and you come to a hopeful place. And it's like what you're hopeful of now is much more grounded in like the reality of the crisis. And to me, that will be the hope that endures, because it's realistic hope, it's practical hope. It's not naive hope. And to bring it back to love, you know, it's like you go through your feelings, and what you come out on the other side is love. And for me, like the real hope is love. It's what you believe in, it's what you fight for, it's your why. So to come back around to the question, I guess, how do I help people hold and act on hope? I really try to model and encourage, to guide people to find hope on their own path and in their own way. Because, you know, it is probably, well, it is too late for some things, but it's not too late for other things, a whole host of other things. And the only way to understand what is savable, what is achievable, what is possible, I think, is to go through the grieving of the planet and the old world.
Thelma, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I agree. And again, everyone has their own journey with hope and how they, and I think again with hope, something that we do at the very beginning of the book is we work on the definition of it. And we're very clear that hope is not the positive belief that everything is going to work out fine. That's not hope. Hope is the understanding that we don't know the future. And in that space, we can act. So hope isn't the like happy-go-lucky, like we'll be fine, it's okay. That's not the hope we're talking about. Hope is, again, remembering that you have power. And so what we hope with this book is provide good facts and good frameworks, because there's actually a lot of misinformation out there in regards to where we're at with the climate crisis. And so we're hoping that with good facts, good frameworks, good stories, people can like build their own understanding, their own mindset, and find their own pathway forward with climate hope. And again, it's totally okay to feel despair, to be worried as all hell. It's totally fine. The question is always, again, how do you not stop there, but how do you keep on moving and saying, I am scared as hell, I am nervous, but I'm gonna take action in some way that I know how. And that's what we really want people to not stop in despair.
I think Rebecca does say in her opening essay that doomsaying has become more of a problem at this stage than denial. And the book is clearly an attempt to respond to that. And I think you've just said, Thelma, that you've got to be cautious of some quote unquote facts that spell the end, see an irreversible tipping point, those kinds of claims.
Yeah, when you see a lot of like doomsday headlines about the climate, what I encourage you to do is like scroll to the bottom of the article, because usually at the bottom there's a quote from the scientist that's like, we still have time if we take action now. It's always buried at the bottom of the article, but it's there because scientists are letting us know that there is still space to act. So look beyond the headlines, do your research, and don't just stop at that shock value of that doomsday article.
Another question. How do we talk about climate change with children in a way that conveys the message or not?
I feel at a loss of how to talk to children about the state of the world. I'm not a parent. I'm 26. I was recently a child myself. But I can say, like, don't hide it. Kids are observant, they're sensitive, they're on the internet, and they know, like, whether or not they're talking about it or asking you about it, like, they know. And if they're not vocalizing however they're feeling about it, they're probably internalizing it. So be open and help guide them through whatever feelings are arising for them. Get real about it. They're not stupid. And to get real about it, you're probably going to have to go through the feelings yourself. Or I think it'll be, well, I know it'll be kind of fumbling, empty, disconnected words that you're offering. So, yeah, I would like to know. I think a big question for me is, like, I want to know where the kids are at and how they feel. I have a brother who's 15. I can't say climate change comes up too often in our conversations. But when it does, he's kind of resigned himself to, like, a fate of, like, oh, the world's so screwed. I'm already dead, which is, like, a pretty terrible place to be when you're 15, when you're thinking about the future. And I think because I've been in the climate world for a while now, and I've gone through, like, the highs and lows of it, I feel like I'm in a pretty good position to talk to him about it. But yeah, I think it's a tough one. I think it depends on the child. I think it depends on your relationship with them. But yeah, the only, I guess, the synthesis of what I'm trying to say is be open and honest and compassionate.
Thelma?
Yeah. We just took our 9-month-old baby to his very first protest like 2 weeks ago. It was in Suva, Fiji, and it wasn't a climate one, but it was about against the Japanese government's release of nuclear wastewater into the Pacific Ocean. We also brought a lot of our nieces and nephews who are young as well, and so we used that action to talk with them, not just about the issue, but about power of action. So they got to march in the streets with hundreds of other people with them and kind of feel that collective action. And so I think it's important when you talk about kids to not just talk about the problems, but talk about how they can be a part of the solutions as well. Teach them how people create change. It's been amazing the past couple of years to see youth in the climate movement step into their power. It's been amazing. And so it's like, we can talk with them about how the world is changing. And we can also teach them that, again, don't give up, take action. And so our son, I'm sure, is going to be an activist his whole life. And we hope he is, because that's what we have to do in order to keep on surviving, is we have to take action. So yeah, 9 months old, very first protest, he's on his journey.
Mm-hmm. Will he be a social media influencer on climate change in the next couple of years, or are you going to hold off on it?
Well, we'll see. I don't know.
Okay. Does the international perspective, your engagement with people from around the world, make you feel more or less optimistic about what's happening in the United States and what we're looking at in 2025?
It makes me more angry. It makes me really angry about the inequalities. You see a lot of investment in renewable energy in the global north, and you're not seeing that level of investment and transfer of funds to the global south. And so, again, a lot of the inequalities that have been happening over hundreds of years with colonialism are still continuing with climate change. Global north countries who are responsible for the climate crisis are not paying into the climate funds like they should be. So it makes me angry. It doesn't necessarily make me more hopeful, but I think there is an important place for anger in this work. And again, if we're aware of the problems, then we can fight to fix those inequalities too. So it's really important to be aware of that, not everyone has the same access to technology as, people in America do.
I would say for that, yes, by income, the bottom 50% of the world is responsible for 12% of global emissions. And that is such a grossly unfair number. And, kind of bathing myself in these facts, really having to sit with the responsibility as a citizen of this country. And it makes me angry, but I'm like, as a person of the world, I am in such a position of power to do something about this, because I live in the United States. And I want us to take our responsibility as a country as seriously as possible. So it doesn't, I think hopeful isn't the right word, but I think it makes me feel urgency for action, responsibility for action. It widens the context, I think, of the organizing and the movement work that's done here, that it's not just about us, but it's about the other 8 billion people in the world who will suffer the consequences, but also reap the benefits of the action that we take in the United States.
Dan, I see you have returned. Questions from people who are listening at the moment?
Yeah, I think we've got time for a couple. We have Alberto, who is a Peruvian environmental journalist, who has an emphasis on climate change and indigenous peoples. And they ask, how can we help hopeful climate action through journalistic coverage when on the one hand, there's ignorance of what climate change means and its consequences in a country as vulnerable as mine. And on the other, there's a denial of some politicians who they consider that climate change or environmental issues are left-wing ideology. What do you suggest we journalists should do with our climate stories? And then also notes that vulnerability in Latin America is different from the global north.
Well, I think you're incredibly brave to be an environmental journalist in Peru. Latin America and the Philippines are the most dangerous places to be environmental journalists. So you are clearly a very brave person. And I think a question is, what can we do to support journalists like you? And I think, if there's ways that people in the global north can connect with different journalist organizations to make sure that there is groups like Global Witness or organization Also Witness who do that work to support reporters like you, because that is really critical work. So I applaud you for that. How do you have conversations across different lines? It's really hard. What does help sometimes is leaning into more solutions focused journalism, because if you have solutions stories, I'll just say it's really easy to talk about what we're fighting against. Even though it is really important, it's really hard sometimes to talk about what we're fighting for. The industries who are destroying the world need to absolutely be called out. The corruption absolutely needs to be called out. But sometimes a safer space is solution stories. So what are the solutions happening in Peru, and maybe telling some of those stories of how people are organizing, the world that we can build beyond the corruption, beyond the devastation. What is the world? What could the world look like? Sometimes those are a bit safer space than calling out corporations or politicians. But again, I think you're incredibly brave. So the question is, how could people support you more?
We also had a question come in. It says, Thelma and Nikayla refer to the movement, implying there's one climate movement. Would it be more accurate to refer to climate movements given their diversity?
I guess when I say movement. I think I talk about big capital M movement. And the way I like to think about it is, there's smaller movements that are like streams, but they all feed into the same lake, which is like the collective dream. So I consider everyone who is fighting for the collective dream to be a part of the capital M movement.
Yeah, I think there's definitely multiple climate movements, whether you're talking about, geography, like the tactics that you lean into, demographics. There's lots of different climate movements, which is okay because we're all taking different approaches to knock down the pillars of support of the fossil fuel industry to create change. In order to create change, you really have to take a wide approach. You have to knock at your enemy from all levels. And so there's different movements hitting at different pillars of support of the fossil fuel industry. So I just encourage folks to find their place in the movement. Are you a lawyer who has legal skills? Are you an artist who can help make banners? Are you a graphic designer? Do you want to just work on your local city council? Like, find your place in the movement and do that work well. And then just have trust other people that they're also doing the thing. Everyone's trying their best. There's no one hero coming to save us all. It's going to take billions of actions from billions of people to get us to where we need to go. And that's okay. And that's beautiful.
I imagine climate crisis and like fossil fuel industry to be, that whole thing to be like the mega boss. And it's about like finding your squad and like knowing your superpower and your skills and abilities and, going at the boss with your squad, but trusting, like, Thelma was saying, that the other squads are doing good work too.
That makes a lot of sense. I think we have time for one more. Let's see. This is from Melanie, who is an artist and climate researcher between Colorado and New York City. They ask thoughts on the language action of climate repair. Is that something that you all have come across?
I haven't heard that words necessarily together. Nikayla, have you?
No.
Me neither. But Melanie, feel free to reach out and give me some context and I can get back to you. Let's see. I will sneak in another one then. A very small question of, this is from Catherine. What efforts do you see working to change the financial industry to truly incorporate the costs of climate change into their balance sheets?
There's definitely a lot of great finance sector focused organizations working on this. Stop the Money Pipeline is one that's working on it. You can look at groups like Oil Change International. There's a lot of orgs who are more on that finance level. And so there's lots of different approaches. It's not just appealing to the ethics of the finance groups, though. It's also appealing to their bottom line. And this is where a lot of activism has come in, of convincing insurance companies, convincing banks to like not fund pipelines. It's not just nice, it actually improves their bottom line because it is dangerous to invest in fossil fuel companies. You're going to have what's called stranded assets, where you're going to build these pipelines and then years from now, they're just going to be useless. And so doing that organizing both from an ethical lens, but also from like a financial surety, there's great research on how the financial organizations who divested from fossil fuels early have actually outperformed other ones. And so we're seeing a lot of those wins from early divestment. So there's definitely great groups who are leaning into the finance sector. And so definitely check them out.
Nothing to add, but I just learned a lot. So thank you, Thelma, for sharing all that.
Yes. Yeah, thank you both so much. And thank you, Michael. And thank you to everyone who attended this webinar, participated in the book club. make sure you stay tuned and you're signed up for our newsletter at Yale Climate Connections, because I have a feeling we'll be doing something like this again, because it seems like it was a hit, and I had a great time. So hopefully everybody had the chance to learn a lot and, feel that there is a community of people who are experiencing similar emotions and working through them. And it's not too late and you're not alone. So
And thank you, Sam, for pitching the idea and making it come to happen. Thank you.
yes, of course. Yes. Hope everybody has a great rest of their night or day if you, like Thelma, are in the morning times. But it's great to be here with all of you, and I'll share a link to the recording once we've got it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
everyone.
Okay.